Distinguished delegates and dear colleagues, please take your seats. So I hope you have a lot of energy. So my name is Shiroma Satyapala from FAO, and I have the pleasure of welcoming you to this session on the role of forest genetic resources and integrated management of pests and diseases in maintaining healthy and resilient forests. Under sub-theme 2, on nature-based solutions for climate change adaptation and mitigation, and biodiversity conservation, and I will also moderate our discussion today. I would like to take this opportunity to thank you and our partners, the Alliance between Biodiversity International and SEAT, the World Agroforestry, for collaborating with the FAO Forestry Division in organizing this session. As most of you know, healthy and resilient forest and agroforestry systems are crucial for safeguarding biodiversity and maintaining ecosystem services, as well as for climate change adaptation and mitigation. Our 15th World Forestry Congress theme also, building a green, healthy, and resilient forest. So such forests and agroforests can also maintain their productivity under changing environmental conditions and thus continue to provide goods and services essential for human well-being and sustainable development. Today, we are experiencing increasing incidence of extreme weather events. We hear about droughts, we hear about floods and tsunamis. Climate change is expected to increase the outbreaks of existing pests and diseases and expose forests to new threats. These risks, when they materialize, can increase tree mortality, result in changes in tree species composition in a given site, and even lead to widespread forest decline. This can have a devastating impacts of local communities and economies. I really want to take you back to Monday. I hope on Monday you all have visited our first session under this sub-theme. On Monday, during this first session, under this sub-theme, we heard the definition of nature-based solution adopted by 5th UN Environment Assembly. Can anybody recall it? No, I'm not going to ask you. Let me recall it. Nature-based solutions are actions to protect, conserve, restore, sustainably use and manage natural or modified terrestrial, freshwater, coastal, and marine ecosystem, which address social, economic, and environmental challenges effectively and adaptively, while simultaneously providing human well-being, ecosystem services, and resilience and biodiversity benefits. Definitely, it is very difficult to memorize it. But the key is, it's very clear that actions to protect and conserve. So then genetic diversity as well as integrated pest management are nature-based solutions for continued adaptation of forests to climate change and for safeguarding biodiversity. Moreover, genetic diversity provides both resilience and resistance to stress factors and forest disturbances, fire, such as outbreaks and pests and diseases. Genetic aspects need to be considered more carefully while managing existing forest and agroforest, and while establishing new ones. In particular, these aspects are crucial in the selection and production of seed and other reproductive material for reforestation, restoration, and other tree planting efforts. Today, countries are planting millions and millions of trees, thinking about a green future. So that is why we need to be careful and select the right species which is not only suitable for today, but also suitable for the future. During this session, we will hear recent advances and experiences in managing forest genetic resources and in controlling the outbreaks of pests and diseases. Our program consists of a 20-minute keynote presentation on recent advances in integrated management of pests and diseases, It will be followed by short intervention by 4 panelists who are joining us in person and virtually. The rest of the session is devoted to a panel discussion, and you are welcome to make comments or present questions to the panelists. Now, before kicking off, let me share some guidance on how to engage in this event. The session will be conducted in English, and simultaneous translation is available in French, Korean, and Spanish. The session is a hybrid event, and virtual participants have the translation available as well. The virtual participant can post their comments and questions using the chat function. In case the time doesn't allow us presenting all your comments and questions to the panelists, they will be considered when preparing the summary of this session for tomorrow's morning plenary. Now, let us begin session with the keynote presentation. The keynote presentation is Integrated Management of Forest Pests and Diseases, a nature-based solution in West and Central Africa. So all the way from Africa, is presented by Professor Paul Bosu. Paul Bosu has worked for the Council for Scientific and Industrial Research, or we call it CSIR, of Ghana over 25 years, mostly at the Forest Research Institute. And he is currently Director General of CSIR. He has a PhD in forest sciences, forest entomology, and his research has focused on the management of pests in planted forests in his home country and in the humid tropics of Africa. Paul is a founding member of the Forest Invasive Species Network for Africa, which is one of the 4 regional networks facilitated by FAO. He also participated in the African Forest Forum study to assess the occurrence of and the impact of forest insect pests and diseases in Africa. Paul, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Roma, and welcome to everybody once again. So with that very elaborate background, I'll just go ahead and mention that my presentation is going to focus quite a bit on the integrated pest management, IPM, as I will be saying, and we'll be focusing a lot on what has happened in the West and Central African regions. Quickly, I'll first give a brief definition of IPM, integrated pest management. I'll mention briefly the forest of West and Central Africa, forest pest problems in West and Central African region, IPM strategies that we have used, we have tried, IPM strategies for invasive native species or indigenous species, and then the IPM strategies for introduced species. And then towards the end, I will give a specific example of what we have done in a particular plantation. So what is IPM? And basically, it's an ecosystem-based strategy. It's an ecosystem-based approach that is aimed at managing the pests rather than controlling. I put them here. Managing means that the aim is not necessarily to eradicate the pests. The aim is to ensure that the pests are managed in such a way that they are kept below a threshold, whether economic or environmental or social threshold. So it's a management approach, and it focuses on long-term prevention of the pests through monitoring, forecasting, detection, and then slowing the development of the pest population. And IPM uses a number of strategies. One of them is to use genetic resistance. So instead of just putting anything there, susceptible individuals or species, you identify resistance and then you use it or you manage it. You also can use biological control, habitat manipulation, modification of cultural practices, silvicultural practices in the case of forestry, and sometimes, if absolutely necessary, the use of pesticides in a very much controlled way to achieve your aim. Let us just remind ourselves of the disease triangle. If we are talking about integrated pest management or pest management in general, then we have to remember that pest management or pest incidents rest on three items: the host or the tree that is susceptible being attacked, and then the pathogen, which is going to attack the tree, which in this case could be an insect, could be a virus, could be a fungus, whatever it is, and an environment that has been created. So these three factors come into play to ensure that trees are either healthy or forests are either healthy or they are attacked. And you take advantage of the disease triangle to provide the IPM strategies that you want to. Quickly to the vegetation types that we have in the region. That whole region, that continent of Africa, you can see there, and the red rectangle there shows the area that I am talking about. The dark green, or perhaps black looking on the screen, is the area in West Central Africa where the forest is very rich, highly diverse, as you can see on the picture in the left. Of course, a lot of it has been degraded or deforested, but that's the area where we get most of the timber trees that are very important in economies. It's the same area we also get a lot of NTFPs. The lower left picture shows a leaf wrapper for wrapping food. The right one shows ladies in Ghana selling mushrooms that they have collected from the forest on the right. So we need to maintain, if we need to maintain a nature-based sustainable forest, then we need to have a forest that has all these things into play. The forests of West and Central Africa, as I mentioned, are very diverse, very rich, but as we have more degradation, we have more deforestation, there has been a need to enter into plantation development. Unfortunately, the very high-value species that fetch more resources, provide the diversity that we need, are highly vulnerable to diseases and pests. And many of these diseases and pests are actually endemic. In the natural high diversity, they don't show up, though they are there. If we put them in plantations, then we have very serious problems. And that has caused a situation where we haven't been able to do too well with native species plantations. I have here three very popular species, highly valuable trees: the African mahoganies, we have the kayas, the entadrophragmas, all of which are highly susceptible or vulnerable. We have the iroko, which is milicia, very good timber, and nuclear. So this picture here is the phytolima is an insect that attacks the iroko tree, the Milicia excelsor or Milicia regia. You can see the insect there, and it causes gall formation. So those big things that you see are the leaf galls as a result of the insect attack. And it easily can cause 100% mortality in nurseries. In the field, it slows growth, causes deformity, and hardly leads to any timber or any good timber without any intervention. We also have the mahogany shoot borer. I think this is fairly well known because of mahoganies also in Central and Southern America. It has the same thing. The insect there is Hypsipila. It's a shoot borer. It causes massive deformities, sometimes causes mortality at the nursery, and then because of the branching, excessive branching, it reduces the value of the trees. We have this other one, less popular, but the tree is very valuable, Aphromosia. Has also this leaf roller or defoliator, which causes a lot of problems. And there are several others. I just picked these three as an example. So what IPM strategies have we used in the region? The first one is host resistance breeding. So as you can see, we have done host selection of resistant individuals from across the range. And I mean that across West Africa, all the countries that have the tree, militia, and all the way to Central Africa, even to East Africa, where we have militia in Tanzania, so that we can develop, select, and identify resistant genotypes for planting. We have done fairly well on that. The same with mahogany, the Kaya evorensis, Kaya antarctica, and all that. We've done a lot of considerable work of selection of resistant or tolerant species, and some work on Nuclear didericae. These are all species that we have done selection for. The next strategy, if you remember the disease triangle, is the cultural strategies that we have used. So for cultural strategies, we have used mixed species planting approach. We realized that for the native species or the indigenous species, by their nature, in the natural forest with high diversity, they are able to stand against massive or dangerous pest damage. So why don't we just introduce these species in a mixed form? So we have conducted trials using 5 species mix, 10 species mix, and it's a way to keep the trees very close to their natural environment. And we've seen considerable degree of success. We've also done what we haven't done, what we intend to do now is to actually study the inclusion of resistant genotypes or resistant species into mixtures. We have done trials. We just don't have the data for that, so we'll do that. And the next thing is enrichment planting. Enrichment planting, as some of you may know, is basically planting these high-value species in degraded forest. So you don't clear the forest. You identify or you look out for the gaps in the forest, and then you put these species there. And it's also a very high diverse area, and it's able to get these species to survive. So the picture there, these 2 pictures, will show you some of the mixed species trials that we have conducted. These plots are now very old, very grown, and we have some of these high-value species surviving under them. And then one of the things that happened was in the past 2 decades or so, when native species were not doing well, then the thought went to, or the attention went to exotic or introduced species. So most of the plantations in Ghana today and in the sub-region, you have teak, we have the cedar or the cedrela, you have eucalypts, melina, pines, and so on. They seem to be doing well, or they seem to be doing well in the past. Now the situation has changed. They are also becoming vulnerable, and it's because endemic or native pests and diseases are now adjusting to them, and they are utilizing them. So the picture you see here is a stem canker on Cedrela odorata. Previously, you wouldn't have any problem. I mean, if you established a Cedrela plantation or a teak plantation, nobody cared about any pest or disease coming in to cause problems. Now we have them. We have the same for eucalypts. This is a study or a survey we did in Niger, and you can see to your left, it's a young eucalyptus plantation in a very, very stressed, harsh environment. And then we have the blue gum calcite, which used to be mainly in the south and then the eastern part of Africa. Now it's all the way in Ghana, it's in Niger, it's in Senegal. So the exotic species that seem to be safe are now also vulnerable. We have genetic manipulation. Some companies in our region have started to manipulate their species such that they can constantly maintain the genetic diversity. So you have this company that comes in, and then they do what we call a controlled pollination. So they collect pollen from very desirable trees, and they use it to pollinate so that they can constantly maintain the disease or the pest-resistant varieties that they need to grow. And they are doing other things to, ensure that IPM is sustained. So quickly, let me just tell you about this example. I told you that teak or Tectona grandis is very, very widely planted in Ghana and also in the sub-region. And for a long time, we had no problem. Teak was to be very stable in monocultures, but now the situation or the story has changed, or the story is changing. You can see here in the picture, the two gentlemen, one to your left, that's a businessman who decided to invest in plantations. And then the one on the right, the same. Also, he is a farmer who decided to plant trees. And they both started having problems. And the businessman was seriously troubled because he had pumped in a lot of money and started seeing diseases and mortality when he thought this species was safe. So we were invited, my team and myself. The report came to us as insect pest problems because he started seeing stem borers on the trees. So we went in. Fortunately, the lady you see there carrying the big fruit body of the mushroom is a pathologist. So we all went together with the team, and it turned out that it is actually not a stem borer problem. The stem borer was, opportunistic. But the real problem was the disease. And it was a root disease. And we realized that it was because of the way the sites were prepared. In planting the tree, he didn't involve any IPM experts, just went in, left a lot of old tree stumps, and which started growing all these types of fungi. And some of them we found to be pathogenic, and they started causing that tree. So we did extensive surveillance and monitoring. We even went beyond that to other plantations, other farms, just to be sure that we got what we wanted. A lot of diagnostics went in so we could capture what the true problem was. And one of the ways or the IPM strategies that we used was to ensure that, number one, we would be able to remove diseased trees from the farm and reduce it as much as possible. The initial reaction of the farmer was to spray everything with chemicals, whether healthy or unhealthy. So we had to put a stop to that. We educated him, and then we decided that we would rather do target management. So we marked trees that we thought were beyond a certain threshold for felling, for thinning, and for burning. And then those that we thought were at a level where we could manage them, then we came in and did this target treatment with the fungicide. So here you see our team. The cross that you see there means that the chainsaw operator should completely cut that tree. If you see a circle, it's a sign for the technician to treat it the base, because it was a root-based disease. And then we did that. And what we also did was to make sure that all the diseased trees that we cut, we put them together at one location and set fire to them, burn them. We did that a number of occasions, and we were able to bring the plantation to a considerably healthy position. In concluding, a few points that I want to note that in view of the rapid spread of invasive species globally, IPM strategies and genetic diversity must be included in all forest management operations, especially in our region, where that thought is now gradually picking up. Number two, native species or indigenous species plantations should be encouraged by mixing species and maintaining high genetic diversity. This will lower risks from pests and diseases while accelerating habitat restoration and establishment of healthy and resilient forests. And lastly, education and awareness on climate change effects on pest spread and the need for IPM and other nature-based approaches to forest management should be intensified. I thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Paul. It was very interesting. So, Paul, he took us to Western Central Africa. So, isn't it a nice tour, looking at all the trees and the insects? Very beautiful photos. But I know it's the sad story that they are damaging our forest. I think we all had the opportunity to learn what is integrated pest management. It is clear that it is a nature-based solution for protecting forests from pests and diseases. Now, we will continue with short interventions by the panelists before opening the floor to comments and questions. So be ready, prepare your questions. Next, I have the pleasure to introduce our first panelist, Dr. Marius Ecu, from the Alliance between Biodiversity International and SEAT. Dr. Marius is a scientist at the Alliance of Biodiversity SEAT, based in Yaoundé, Cameroon, and working in the areas of forest genetic resources management and resilient landscape restoration. Currently, he is implementing bilateral projects in Burundi, Cameroon, Cote d'Ivoire, and Kenya. Marius, you have the floor.
Okay, thank you very much for the opportunity, and welcome again to the participants. So Paul talked to us a lot about all of the problems we have in West and Central Africa. I'm also from this region. I'm native from Benin, West Africa, and I'm currently based in Cameroon, so I know really the region. And what I want to talk to you today is, I will not talk about, tree species, but I want to go more to what I call the production landscape. So, and how to use, how in our group we are using the tree diversity. It's a huge diversity of native tree species we have in the landscape, and how we are using it in our research group, to deal with this issue of pests and disease. First, in the group where I belong, we believe that with the tree diversity are very important, to decarbonize the food system. It's also important, to enhance the diversity and in the production landscape. And with diversity, we only have resilience and adaptation. And of course, it's also important to diversify the livelihood of our rural population. But the issue is we have this big diversity, but it's not really used. And if you know today, with the UN Decade of Ecosystem Restoration, all of our countries have, a huge hectare of land they want to restore, but nobody is really thinking about what do we want to plant, what kind of species we want to put in the landscape. Are we going to use, again, only exotic species, or do we want to promote the native species that are really providing different product and ecosystem services to our rural population? So the way we do it, our methodological approach is threefold. First is really to identify the diversity and try to safeguard this diversity. This is very important. And then to promote the sustainable use. You can't just conserve to conserve, so you need to conserve and also promote the sustainable use. If you want only to conserve, then it might disappear also in the long term. And here, what we are doing in my group are really designing some decision support tool, to help people to select the right species for the right place, for the right purposes, and also what I call transforming tree crop production system. When I talk about tree crop here, I'm mentioning like cacao and coffee, which are very important commodity crops that our country and our farmers are producing and bringing revenue. And we know those species are grown in a forest landscape. Most of them, they need trees, also like a shade. And it's very difficult. Nobody seems to really know how to, create an agroforest around the cocoa or those other commodity crops. And we are trying to see how we can support with the diversity of trees we have in the landscape, and also how to deliver the diversity. So, talking about the tree crops, the first thing we try to do is, look at, with the diversity of trees we have in the landscape, and what are the species we can promote or recommend to different farmers to plant together with their crops, where we know it will help, to have a good production of the commodity crop they want, but also bring other revenue for the population, a lot also for women. The gender component is very important. And also, if we talk about like a shade tree, of course, you don't want to ask a farmer to put a shade tree that will be host for different pathogens that will, attack their crops. So we need to be very careful in selecting those species. And that's what we are doing in my research group. By looking at those tree species, we look at different threat data for each species to know if there will be. Oh, how to go back? Can I return? Yeah, I went. Oh, there's no. Back again, once. Oh. Okay, thank you. Yeah, thanks. Sorry. So, yeah, it's okay. So one of the things we look at, so the tree species should be compatible, with the tree crops. So will not really, there will be no competition, or it will not be like a horse for different pests and disease. And also those species, including with the cocoa, we need also to look at the climate. Climate is changing a lot. So are those population of trees that we want to plant or promote in the landscape, are they adapted to this area? Not only now, but also for the future. This is very important. We also need to look at really the local stress condition. If you go from one place to the other, the conditions are not the same. The soil is different, the climate, everything. So we need to take all of those things into account. And at the end also, it's very important to tell people where to collect the material to form. We need to clearly define some seed transfer zone, because we can't just keep planting, collecting any material anywhere and planting them in place where they are not adapted. So those are all things we are doing to elaborate the decision support tool in our case. The second thing is also here, this is a case study if we are from Peru, where we are looking at the impact of climate change on the distribution of cocoa genotype. And if you see clearly in the map, you can see that, the cultivated variety they have now have a very limited range that are suitable for the species. But the local native, variety, cocoa is actually originating from those areas. You see it's more widespread. So we are now recommending, to farmers that they need to start considering those local variety to plant, and how to integrate them also with other shade trees to avoid those pests and disease in the landscape. And we are also doing some distribution of pests and disease, under different climate change scenarios in the same landscape, also to give good recommendations for people. So to finish, what we are doing in my group is really to see how to use the diversity of native trees we have in the landscape, and looking at the functional threat of those species and bringing them into the production. And so we can have a good production of the tree crop, but also bring other revenue and use for those tree species. And also to promote this diversity, and this is really the key if we really want to have resilience and fight for climate change. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Marius. You can take the seat here. I think it's very interesting. So with the UN Decade of Restoration, every country is planting more and selecting the right seeds and the right species according to the site and according to the climatic conditions is very important. So now, I would like to introduce our second panelist. It's Dr. Prasad Hendre from World Agroforestry, or C4ICRAF, who is joining us virtually. Dr. Prasad is a genetist and plant breeder with expertise in applying various molecular genomics tools for enhancing breeding efficiency and developing improved varieties. He has worked in diverse plant and animal systems to develop gene mapping. He manages the African Orphan Crops Consortium Genomics Lab at ICRAF, aiming to generate whole genome sequence of 101 targeted African orphan crops. I'm sure you wanted to know what does it mean, orphan crops. So Prasad, you have the floor to explain all that.
Yeah, thanks, Shiroma, for the nice introduction. Let me start with my presentation. Can you have the first slide, please? Yeah. So today I'm going to talk about how the tree genetic diversity can act as a buffer against existing and emerging pests and diseases. Next slide, please.
Next slide.
Next slide, please. Okay, yeah. So we all know that tree gene banks are the reservoirs of diversity, and they can really help in building and maintaining the tree genetic diversity. So we have a tree gene bank, a C4ICRAF tree gene bank, and we know a healthy landscape level tree and plant diversity can provide buffer against pests and diseases by balancing the facilitation and dilution of the disease and pest populations. This is where we can talk about what Paul was talking. It was intra-species as well as interspecies diversity. And we have in our gene bank more than 7,000 accessions for 190 species, and that can provide a good platform to achieve intra as well as interspecies diversity on the diverse landscapes. We have around 19,000 accessions in live field gene banks spread across 18 countries and 49 sites. They cover around 81 species. They are mainly the orthodox. We can't maintain the seeds for them in our gene banks. This is a map which shows where all our gene banks are located, and we have a function of course, the safeguarding, conservation, and use, as Marius was introducing in the beginning. And apart from that, how do we do that? We collect, we conserve, we multiply, we distribute, and we are also involved in domestication and pre-breeding of some of these tree crops. And we do distribute the clones for farmers as well as researchers. And of course, we also have a very important function of data publication and deposition of these data across different worldwide webs, and research on the genetic diversity of these crops. Next slide, please. Yeah, so this is a practical example where we are actually applying diversity breeding. I mean, the breeding, one of the points which IPM, the point of IPM emphasized by Paul was how to introduce the genetic resistance or host class resistance. And we know it's quite a cumbersome process to really find out genes for individual species. So rather than doing at individual species, which of course will be done, at the moment, what we feel that introducing diversity in the landscapes, we call it as diversity breeding, which is an approach to provide resilience to biotic as well as abiotic stress. And those diversity breeding orchards are breeding seed orchards where we select the clones or the individuals in a specially designated areas, and they're allowed to intermate. And we collect the seeds from these diverse material, and then that seed is supplied to the farmers. So this is not something which is a unique clonal monoculture agroforestry practice, which is quite prevalent in timber production. Instead, we supply diverse but high-yielding seeds, and that's what we call it as breeding seed orchards. This approach ensures that genetically diverse seed material is supplied to farmer, which would provide buffer against abiotic stress tolerance. And this is very elegantly described in one of our papers in Trends in Plant Science, as a recent one. I have given the link there. So this is all described in that paper, how the diversity breeding and the breeding seed orchard can achieve the target of increasing productivity without affecting the landscape resilience. Under this is an example project where we are doing this under PATSPO, which is provision of adequate tree seed portfolio, and we are implementing this project in Ethiopia. And under this project, we have 26 diversity breeding orchards, or BSOs, for 13 tree species which are established in 10 sites in Ethiopia. This is work which is ongoing. So eventually, when the trees grow, and then we have selected the trees for diversity, they will be allowed to intermed. The seeds will be collected and they will be supplied to the farmers for their plantation. This is a very well accepted model by the governments, and it's ready to be replicated in other countries in Africa as well. Yeah, next slide, please. So apart from having just a diversity and a tool to how to enhance the diversity on the landscape, it's very important to know which tree can be planted at what place and with what benefit. And we have a biodiversity R package developed by our unit in ICRAF, C4 ICRAF, which helps in understanding the distribution of trees for present and future climates. Here, I've given an example where the same thing was done in Ethiopia. We have a lot of trees species. It's a database of various tree species, and you can select a particular locality. And if you click that locality, you will get a list of the tree species that can be planted here. And this is for the present climate, but we also have predicted future climate, which now can tell down the line which will be the new species that can get adapted to that particular area, considering the climate change scenario. This is also available on our website, Tree Knowledge Platform. I have given the link down there. Next slide, please. Okay, apart from all this, we also need to have a well-equipped lab which can help in identifying diseases and pests. And we have a modern lab at our tree gene bank, which was established with the support of CGIAR Gene Bank platform. And we have a quarantine facility. We have all other equipments to help in identifying different trees, pathogens and pests. We have a technician who is doing this job, and this is one of its kind lab for tree pathogens and tree diseases in the whole of Africa, I would say, which is specialized for tree pests and diseases. Thus, I have actually covered 4 major areas about how the tree genetic diversity can help in providing at the landscape level diversity, how it can be used through diversity breeding for enhancing the plantation output and plantation resilience, and about knowing which tree can be planted at what place, and then 4th about the various tools and techniques that can be used for identifying pathogens and diseases. I'm done.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prasad. It is really comforting to know we have gene banks to protect the future tree species. Also, good to know there are tools to decide which tree species are good for current situation and also for future situation. I hope you will use the website and go and check and learn more about the selection of tree species. Now I want to invite our 3rd panelist, Shambhu Charmakar from Technische University Dresden in Germany. He's also joining us virtually from Nepal. Shambhu has worked for more than a decade in different fields of forestry. Recently, he also worked as forest management specialist at FAO and led a forest health project in Nepal, developing The capacity of institution under the Ministry of Forest and Environment to manage forest invasive aliens, plants, insect pests, and pathogens. He's currently preparing his PhD at the Technische University Dresden, Germany. Shambhu, you have the floor.
Thank you, Dr. Siroma, for this nice introduction. Slide, please, yeah. So today, my presentation title will be Building Capacities to Improve and Sustain Forest Health to Enhance the Resilience of Forestry in Nepal. Next slide. Nepal is a small country in South Asia. It has about 45% of total land of the country is a forest and other wooded land, and it harbors rich biodiversity, and more than 2/3 of peoples are highly dependent on forest for timber, fuel, fodder, food, medicines, and making their livelihoods. In the meantime, forest degradation is a prominent issue in Nepal, and it has a lot of impact on socio-cultural, economic, and environmental aspect. And the spread of invasive alien plants, insect pest pathogen, IAS is one of the key 9 drivers, and its severity and extent is consistently growing. In this backdrop, Forest Research and Training Center under the Ministry of Forest and Environment of Nepal, with support of FAO, implemented this project in between 2021. The project aimed to build capacities to improve and sustain forest health to enhance the resilience of forest. Next slide. So is the current state of knowledge and available data were not sufficient to inform management decisions on invasive alien species in natural and planted forest. The project carried out both field assessment and online survey on invasive alien species. And the surveys revealed that the invasive alien plants, insect pest pathogens have highly affected to those very economically important forest types. For example, Pinus roxburghi, Schema castenopsis forest, Pinus wallichiana forest, Alnus forest, poplar forest, Corcus forest, and also Michaelia champaka and Cedrus devadara forest in the hills and mountains, which is not very often reported. And likewise, the Shuriaravasta, Dalbergia, Acacia forest, and planted Tectona grandis and eucalyptus forest in the tropics or lowland of Nepal. The survey also prioritized 14 invasive plants, including some few world worst species among 30 available in Nepal based on their abundance and impact on forest ecosystems. And Mycenia, Lantana, Cromolena were the top 3 species. And similarly, the Mycenia, Ageratina, and Parthenium species with tropical origin are rampantly expanding in different habitats in the hills and mountain ecosystems. In the meantime, there is lack of appropriate policies, mechanism, long-term systematic and science-based invasive alien species management in forest ecosystems are placed, which is truly urgent to address in Nepal. Next slide, please. So apart from this, the project also built the capacity on integrated pest management activities, and some of them have been highlighted here. First of all, the project developed field guides and training materials on how to identify invasive alien species and train those forestry officials, concerned stakeholders and authorities and some local communities. And also the project conducted the training on how to implement phytosanitary standard, pest risk assessment to those stakeholders and authorities. Similarly, the project established the permanent plot along the different transit line and established the laboratory on entomology, pathology with basic equipments, and established the forest health helpline services, that is also called hotline. And we capacitated those forestry officials and the institutions on how to monitor those invasive alien species. And another, improving and sustaining productivity of plantation forests, especially focusing on Tectona grandis and eucalyptus, was delivered to those concerned stakeholders and local communities. And as we all know that the seed and nursery are the future of forest. And if we did not handle it, manage or care the infestation of invasive alien plants, insect, pest, and pathogen during seed collection, storage, and nursery management, this may work as a carrier for invasive alien species to the natural and planted forest ecosystems. That's what the project also trained, capacitated those officials and institutions, stakeholders in this arena. Similarly, the project raised the awareness among the public, conducting different seminar, workshop, and meetings at the local level, and disseminating about invasive alien species and its potential impact through a radio network and publishing at local journals. And these were the first steps of integrated pest management in forest sector in Nepal. And this has obviously created a foundation for next step. And likewise, the project has prepared a roadmap for management of invasive alien species. And this includes the government, communities, private sector, and academic interventions, institutional and implementation modalities, and an investment plan for the long-term invasive alien species management in the future in Nepal. So this project has established some foundation for the next step. So next slide, please. Okay, this is all about my presentation for today. Thank you for your attention, and if you have questions, please.
Thank you very much, Shambhu, for sharing the Nepal experience. It's great to see how from the scratch you have developed the integrated pest management system against forest invasive species. I think this will be a very good example and lessons learned for many other countries who are starting to implement the integrated pest management in forestry. Now, I would like to invite our fourth panelist from the host country, and she's Dr. Herim Han from Korea Forest Service. Herim, the floor is yours. Dr. Herim is forest entomologist specialized in pine wilt disease. She works as the manager of the Forest Entomology and Pathology Division at the National Institute of Forest Science. She also holds the position of deputy of the IUFRO Working Party for Pine wilt disease. In December 2020, Dr. Herim received the Presidential Award for her contribution to control of forest pests and diseases in the Republic of Korea. Herim, you have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Shirova. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. It's my pleasure to share our experience on integrated management of pine wilt disease in Korea.
You can remove this.
Oh, okay. Okay, pine wilt disease is one of the most devastating forest disease in, especially in the East Asian countries. Originally, pine wilt disease came from North America, and then later it transferred into the Japan in early 1900. In Korea, it was first reported in 1988. It was started from the city of the south area of Korea, and it started to gradually disperse to the other area from 2000. So far, the total number of removed trees by infection of pine wilt disease was almost 13 million numbers. The control method of pine wilt disease is adjusted to the disease cycle of pine wilt disease. There are two different organisms related to cause pine wilt disease. One is pine wood nematode, the other one is pine sawyer beetle. In the spring, this pine sawyer beetle emerged from dead tree. Usually, they carry nematode inside the body, and they transmit nematode to the healthy tree by feeding the trees. Later, the infected trees are dead. This insect start to lay eggs in the dead trees. In the winter, the dead trees are usually carry both nematode and insect. This is the perfect time to get rid of this infected tree at the same time, including insect and nematode. At this time, we cut and treat the trees by wood chipping, fumigation, and burning method. On the other side, for the healthy trees, we apply trunk injection. It contains nematicide, and it prevents healthy trees against the pine wood nematode. During spring to summer, we treated the area spray or ground spray for targeting insect. To achievement of successful management of pine wilt disease, it is very important to have cooperative systems among different responsible agencies. The first, in Korea, we have very strong governmental leadership to manage pine wilt disease. Korea Forest Service, they plays a role as a central control tower, and they establish special law and measures, and they put a lot of effort to secure budget and personnel. For the research part, the National Institute of Forest Science, they concentrate on all scientific researches and development related to pine wilt disease. They provide management strategy to the government strategy for pine wilt disease, and develop a lot of various control techniques. Korea Forest Promotion Institute, they provide database information related to the result of monitoring of impacted pine trees. Also, they're doing advanced monitoring techniques, development of advanced monitoring techniques. And also, they put more effort to improve system sophistication for application. Including public cooperation, I think this well-organized cooperative system is the key factor to reach the success of management of pine wilt disease in Korea. Thank you. This is all.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hiram. It's very, looking at the slides, you can see why she has received the presidential award. So she has done remarkable research on pine wood nematode. So I just want to, it is kind of devastating to hear that 12 million trees were removed because of pine wood nematode. So the importance of implementation of integrated pest management is clearly showing this Korean experience. Now, I can see that our chat is very active. We have many questions from the chat. So we will take some of those questions. So I think you all have an idea now. IPM and genetic diversity are nature-based solutions to establish healthy and resilient forests. So before we attend to the chat, now I would like to open the floor for comments. So this is your opportunity to ask questions from our panelists. And we have experience from all over the world, so it would be very good opportunity. So please, there are 3 microphones, and when you're asking the question, please tell your name and organization before your question. Thank you very much. Now the floor is yours. I can see one gentleman there. Yeah, I have seen 2 hands. Please.
Simon Lawson from the University of Sunshine Coast in Australia. One of the things that Paul mentioned was the benefits of mixed native species in plantations. And I guess these might be especially applicable for managing pests in community and agroforestry. But I just wanted to get an idea from Paul, what about industrial plantations where the companies tend to prefer even-age monocultures? How can we develop IPM for those systems?
So, yeah. Please, Paul, answer that question.
Okay. So thank you very much. The mixed native species plantations, the one I described, also has a potential for industrial, for timber, except that, like you are saying, it's a relatively...
Paul, you can remove
okay.
that one, yeah.
It's a relatively low scale, and industries don't quite like that. But, there's the other type of mixed species where the species are planted in blocks, so you can, or in rows. And so we have been trying to encourage that. So if you are doing a number of species, and for ease of management and all that, so maybe you have 1 block of species A, a hectare, 3 hectares, depending on the scale of operation, and then another block. So within that constraint, it's also possible to have a mixed native species plantation. But like I was saying, industry really struggles for that unless they are pushed by legislation to do that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Paul. The next question I will take, yes, the gentleman there. Please come to the microphone and ask your question.
Thank you. Looks like Paul's popular today. I have a question for him too. I'm Daniel Bernker of the UFRO headquarters. Thank you for your presentation. I would just like to know, what eucalyptus species were you referring to? Are they clones and are they hybrids? And also, do you have problems with leptocybes as a pest? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let me admit that I don't recall the particular clones or hybrids that were being used. But for leptocybes, yes. We have it in Ghana, we have it in Senegal, we have it in Niger, and several other places. It used to be down there in the south and east. Now it's with us in the West African region. But, talking about the hybrids, and we have all kinds of eucalyptus species and hybrids. Sometimes it's even difficult to tell which ones because of all the things that go on. So, but for leptocybin, yes, we have it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Paul. And now, actually, I will go to our virtual participants. So there's a question. I think it will go to Prasad, or I think mainly Prasad. Is there any gene bank and decision support tool for tree selection for South Asia? First Prasad, and then maybe Marius. Over to you, Prasad.
Yeah, sure. So the question is whether do we have a gene bank and tree selection tools for South Asia? So at the moment we are developing these tree selection tools, decision-making tools for Africa. It's not for all of the countries in Africa. It's still something which is ongoing. And if a country is interested in developing it, I mean, we can always link up with them. We have resources, we have experts, and definitely we can help if a country is interested in developing such tools for their regions. Second question about the gene banks. Of course, we have regional gene banks also in Asia. We have a gene bank in Bangladesh. We have a gene bank in Kazakhstan. We also have helped Nepal to conserve some of the species. In Sri Lanka, we have our partners, even in Indonesia and some parts of Southeast Asia. We do have partners whom we help in maintaining their gene bank and their native species. So we do have them, but if you want to have some specific information, you please visit our gene bank website, and we have a list of all the 250 species and where they are. You can get it from there. Yeah, thank you. Thanks for the question.
Okay. Thank you very much, Prasad. Now, Marius, would you like to add something?
Yes. In Asia and Southeast Asia, at biodiversity, we understand like almost 20 years ago that you can't deal with such issue in isolation. So we set up what we call those forest genetic resource network. And in Asia, we have one called APFORGEN, Asia Pacific Association of Forest Genetic Resources. And only last year, we've published, work with data collected across all of the country for 72 tree species. And the data can be accessed in a website called tree.diversity.org, where you can really select different tree species, and it will tell you what are the species adapted to those areas and where you can collect the material from. So it's already available online. And the second question was about, gene bank, right?
The question is about whether they have gene bank or decision support tools for selection of trees.
Yeah, the tool I'm talking about can help you to also for conservation and restoration. It's already online. But also for some key species, like Dalbergia, rosewood, we have a specific work in a few countries like Cambodia, Philippines, and also Thailand, where really farmers are now collecting seed and also establishing their own nursery and selling, seedling from, documented sources really to plant those for those high-value timber species. And this is an ongoing work led by one of my colleagues based in Malaysia. Thank you.
Okay. Now, actually, we have a questions to Herim. The question is, thank you very much. Management of pine wood nematode in Korea is a very good example of the importance of the integrated approach in maintaining healthy and resilient forests. Could you tell us what are the challenges and successes of IPM against pine wood nematode?
Okay. Actually, pine wood nematode is an invasive species in Korea, so maybe we need a different strategy to control pine wilt disease compared to other pests or pathogens. So the difficult part was we have to deal with these two different organisms, nematode and insect vector, at the same time. And the mortality rate is so high, and the speed of spreading of this disease is very fast. So the best way to control this disease is early detection and early diagnostic, and then early control of the infected tree. So at this point, we concentrated on the development of the monitoring technique and diagnostic scientific techniques. So recently, we adapt a QR code system for the infected tree. And then we also use NFC monitoring system, and also use the photograph of, taken by drone or area, the other vehicles, area vehicles. And recently, the National Institute of Forestry Research Institute developed the DNA basis quick diagnostic system is especially used for the field. So all these kind of advanced techniques are really useful to control pine root disease in our.
Thank you very much, Erin, for this answer. Now there's another question there are several questions online, but I would really like to now ask the audience in person here, do you have any questions? Or while you are thinking the question, shall I go and attend to the virtual ones? Okay, seems to be we will go to the virtual questions. Now this question is a very difficult one to answer, so I don't know I will not ask who will going to answer. Whoever going to answer, let me know. The question is from Nelly Pacheco. She's asking how soil management and biogeochemical cycles can affect the resilience of forests against pest and climate change, considering that the availability of micronutrients is not the same everywhere and depends a lot on the type of soil and the biogeochemical processes that can occur at microsites. So can anybody answer that question?
Okay, I was just going to, and I agree with you, it's a difficult question, but what comes to mind immediately is matching species to site. For every plantation, the first thing to do is to determine the site, what's there, and what species would be appropriate. And the e-craft presentation, for example, is a clear case where it describes or demonstrates where each species can be planted within a region. So that's how I'm going to start with, species and matching it to site. Yeah.
And I will just add that, for biodiversity, CIAT, we are part of the CGAR consortium, and we are just starting with new initiatives. And there's one called Nature Positive Solution in which I'm involved. And there is a worker package, called Restore, where we deal with restoration, but it's also involved looking at what is happening underground, so the soil condition and also some hydrological work from our colleague from IMI. So we will, because it's important to look at the genetic diversity of the tree, but also we need to know what is happening underground. Sometimes you have some tree species that need, ectomycorrhizal species that need interaction with some specific fungi to grow. And if you don't have them in the land, then you can do anything, it will not happen. So we want to look at those details also, not only above, but also below ground, and also looking at those water issues. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Paul and Marius, because Nelly is very happy with the answer, so she says thank you so much. Now, actually, I want to ask, there are two questions, but one question is, it's about implementation of IPM in Nepal. The question is, what are the biggest barriers for countries at this stage, the first step of implementation of IPM? So the question goes to Shambhu. Shambhu, can you please answer the question?
Thank you, Dr. Siroma, for this question. And actually, in Nepal, this Ministry of Forest and Environment and other concerned stakeholders has been attempting to tackle with invasive alien species through integrated pest management. But the problem is they have some policy provisions and programs. However, they exist in very highly fragmented form. And due to that, there is lack of clear and specific policies to deal with this. And also we have lack of long-term strategies and mechanism to on it. And the second one is the awareness and on long-term impact of invasive alien species on socio-cultural, economy, and environment, and capacity at local level are still, lacking and insufficient. Similarly, for the seed storage office, they are working on seed collection, seed management, seed storage, and also they are taking care of some quality seedling, planting material production, and the Ministry of Forest Environment, they are trying to include some of the programs at the local level. However, there is a lack of collaboration and coordination within and among national, provincial, and local level. And those are really hurdling to grow up this intricate at the current stage. Thank you very much for this question. I hope I could address the question.
Okay. Thank you very much, Shambhu. It was a perfect answer. Thank you. Now, actually, we have another question. I think it is to Paul and also to Hiriam. So it is about leaf diseases. So maybe first, Paul, you can answer. Do you have leaf disease problem? If then, how do you manage?
Yes, we do. Let me quickly add to the last answer. For our country and region, the issue I have with IPM is that we usually treat it as a firefighting approach to pest management. So there could be a very huge plantation or forest management program, and nobody thinks about IPM until the problem comes. It's given a very low priority, and it's not a way to go. So that would be my first thing. About leaf diseases, yes. As far as the plantations or the forests are concerned, diseases of leaves and others are not so much of a problem until around about 95, when we started planting cyber in experimental plots, and the diseases started showing up. So they are there, they are endemic, but within the natural forest and other, they are not showing up until we start going into. There are diseases of insects, insect pests of trees, but not so much diseases that I recall. There was another part to it. Is it the?
No, that's the question.
That is it. Thank you.
Yeah. Actually, Dr. Hiriam, do you want to answer that question about leaf diseases?
I'm not familiar with it. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. But you have another question. The question is from Amjad. He's asking, Korea has successfully managed the pine wilt nematode, and he wants to know what is Korea is playing their part for other countries in management of pine wilt disease. So, how you are supporting other countries?
Oh, actually, first of all, I would like to say thank you, the supporting, for us to, have a position to support other countries. But we've been cooperated with other countries, with Japan and China and Portugal. Europe has a very strong, committee, it's European committees to make a force to management of pinewood disease. So scientists, we have a meeting in UPRO, and we are corresponding and help each other. But in the future, if they ask us to work more about to involve, the management of pinewood disease in other countries, we really are willing to support and help each other.
Thank you very much. I think Amjad will be very happy to hear that Korea is willing to support. And now the next question is from Jose Angel Lopez. And the question is, it is to, I think it's Marius and Prasad. What is the magnitude of the loss of diversity of forest genetic resources due to pests and diseases globally or by country? And what is the future control measure? I think it's a very big question. So I hope, Marius, would you answer first? Over to you.
Yeah, it's a very big question. I think I can only talk about what I know. I take like, I mentioned, production system. Like if I take cocoa, in Côte d'Ivoire, there is a disease called Chollen shoot, which is very, very popular because if the country has lost like 80% of the forest cover within 50 years, which is mostly due to the cocoa crops. And for some reason, farmers believe that, it's good to have monoculture. Compared to a place like Cameroon where I'm based, and if you go to the cocoa farm, you can have a big diversity of native species. Like 3 years ago, there was a student from France. We have like almost 53 species within a cocoa farm of only 4 hectares. But so it's with this big loss of diversity, I mean, there's no trees in the landscape. Of course, there are more incidents of disease. And now the thing is how to bring back the trees in the landscape. This is what is happening now in Côte d'Ivoire and also partly some part of Ghana as well. So those are, you can have a lot of case study like that. And when it's come now to those native species, as I said, for many of them, we still really haven't studied them. Like there is a tool that biodiversity has developed called Diversity for Restoration. And for Cameroon alone, we have 273 native species in the tool that we documented. We started with like 440 species that farmers mentioned that they want. And we realized for those 273 species we have in the tool, there is almost no information published on even how to propagate them, So we are still doing ethnobotanical survey, learning from the farmer to update those tools. And when it will come to study of genetic diversity, I mean with molecular marker, there's many of them. We still don't, we haven't done them yet. So it's good, those work we are doing are also raising awareness of the species and pushing more scientists and the institute to work on that so we can generate more data. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marius. Prasad, would you like to add something?
Yeah, I mean, we know from the example of American chestnut that this is not something which does not happen, and it has been happening and it will happen. It's maybe happening elsewhere as well. But then the problem which we have is we have no baseline data, especially for the native species. We still are not knowing what is the extant genetic diversity for them. And as Marius was telling, we are also using molecular tools for understanding what is the baseline diversity that we are actually dealing with. And once that is done, then perhaps we will have a tool to navigate through how this baseline diversity is getting impacted by various elements of climate change, including the pests and diseases. But yes, that is something which is really a problem, especially for forest genetic resources, how to do that, and with enormous diversity of species, interspecies, how to do that. And yes, we appreciate that is something which has to be done to mitigate the economic impact of all these changes on phylogenetic resources. And there's another question here from Ferenc, that is there a resistance breeding and selection going on in our lab? So at the moment, we are using, as I told, the diversity breeding approach for incorporating some kind of resilience in the landscape. And we are still in the process of developing various breeding programs, but at the moment, productivity remains the main target, and it follows with and our selection targets are decided by what we call it as a mutual consent with the farmer. So if the farmers and the community comes out with a specific requirement for incorporating resistance, then it does get incorporated into our breeding programs and selection programs. But at molecular level, yes, we do have ways to characterize different resistances.
Thank you very much,
Thank
Professor.
you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
I just had to. I just had one point to add for the question which was posed by Nelly about soil management and biogeochemical cycles. There's an approach, I'm sure many of us are aware, we call them as the approach as site-specific nutrient management, SSNM, which is becoming quite prevalent in croplands. And I think that's where it's going to help us in understanding how much of the nutrients are getting carried away from the land and how much of that actually can be put up in the soil itself. The leaves, the bark can actually go into the place from where it belongs to, and the wood which goes out should be compensated by putting in the extra nutrients in the soil. So this is my take on that question, a small take, but there's a lot that can be talked about, the deficits and how the deficits can be managed for that.
Okay, thank you very much, Prasad. I think that three of you have answered that question. I think we have a very satisfied question there. So now actually we are very close to completion, but we have many questions. I would like to actually ask Paul this question. It is about the wood borer species intake. The Ferran Lakatosh is asking, because I think you have a pretty good idea what are those species in detail. So if you can give an answer, it would be good.
Okay, thank you. For wood borers in Ghana and West Africa, we don't have, the species that we have are not specific to wood borers. They are, as we described, they are generalists. And what we have a particular group called Apathy species. So we have the Apathy terebrans and Apathy monachus. And these two species, they actually take advantage of stressed trees. If the trees are healthy and growing, they may attempt, but they will be pushed out. But then when the trees are stressed out, as in very dry, harsh climate environment, then they will be killed, or at least they will be riddled with all the holes that make them less of a value. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Paul. Distinguished delegates and dear colleagues, we are now approaching the end of session, so let me try to summarize some key messages based on the discussions. Firstly, it was stressed that maintaining genetic diversity in forests and tree-based production system and deploying right tree germplasm on right side can help increase in the resilience of forest and coping with pests and diseases, as well as with the adverse impacts of climate change. Moreover, we heard that there is a need to enhance the production and supply of forest reproductive material to meet the increase in demand of reforestation and restoration. Definitely when the countries are requesting millions and millions of trees to be planted. It was also noted that tree breeding can increase the productivity of forest and agroforestry system, and they are resistant to pests and diseases. Finally, we learned that the development and implementation of management strategies integrating forest health and genetic aspects are crucial to safeguard the world forest, especially in view of a changing climate. Therefore, when we started the session, we talk about nature-based solution, and we talk about whether integrated pest management and genetic diversity, how they could be considered as nature-based solution. So it is very clear, maintaining genetic diversity and applying integrated pest management should be promoted as nature-based solution for healthy and resilient forest and agroforestry system. Now, I would really like to put up your hands and give some round of applause to our wonderful panelists, in person who is in here and in virtually joining with us. Thank you. With these remarks, I conclude this session. I thank you, our speakers, and all of your attendants on behalf of the wider FAO team here as well as our partners. I hope you benefited from the discussions during this session. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all for being patient.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Mr. Robert.